Uh, just let me say that our live conference that we had to cancel this year, we were going to try something called a rapid fire session, where we had a whole bunch of people, a variety of people get up there and give little blurbs just like this. It's kind of refreshing, isn't it? It's nice to hear these short blurbs. Anyway, thank you for those of you who are responding. And Dean, it's all yours.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob, and welcome back, everybody. And I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to Steve Prevette. Steve gave us a little bit of a teaser earlier, so thanks for that, Steve. But Steve's background, he's 12 years as a U.S. Navy submarine officer, 28 years of experience as a DOE contractor, really focused, I think, Steve, on performance metrics and QA and that kind of thing. And I think the big integral part of Steve's background is on data, is on measurement, and really how to apply that. And what Steve's going to walk us through this afternoon is how do you take data and turn it into something that helps meaningfully create aligned action, so you're focusing on the right target variables and using the right kind of predictive measures to kind of cut out noise in data and really focus it on trends that you could do something about. So Steve, hopefully I was in the ballpark, and take it away. Steve, you might be muted.
Mute. There we go.
There you go.
When I went to share screen, it kind of automatically went to mute me. That seems like a human engineering type of fault to the system, perhaps. Well, I do want to thank you all for listening to a stats lecture after lunch. I always seem to get stuck with this. I got stuck with this in Colorado Springs, too. But Charles opened up a lot of good doors this morning. He introduced you to Dr. W. Edwards Deming. Now, Deming was a very big influence on what I'm doing. I'll say that during World War II, not only did a lot of what he talked about happen, but the application of statistical process control, the development of something called operations research, is which I have my degree in, comes from World War II. So a lot of this, we're really going back to 1930 to 1940 to learn the lessons that Dr. Schuhart, Dr. Deming, and those folks came up with at the time, which we may have forgotten. So yes, I'm Steve Prevette. I'm with my primary customer right now is Savannah River National Laboratory. On Thursday, I will be, instead of listening to the presentation, I'll be making charts on Thursday, as we'll talk about. We statisticians live and die by the monthly cycle. Now, we're going to kind of do an update. I know many of you may not have been at past HPRCT conferences, but this is kind of a continuation from 2019, specifically about my current customer, Savannah River National Laboratory. Now, I am a floor corporate employee. I'm really not a vendor. I'm a practitioner, but yes, within the company, I support a couple of different sites. We're also going to do a little bit of a demonstration of trending here without a safety net. So Bob will help me. You will generate data that we will then analyze together, and in 45 minutes, see what that data has to tell us. So I'm going to give this back to Bob. He is going to ask you on the poll EV to provide a random number, got to be random, between 1 and 10, and you're going to pick a date that's important to you, sometime in the past 10 years. This will let us do some infrequent analysis of time between events. So if you could please, Bob, go ahead and jump in, please. Oh, looks like we're already rolling here. Good. So that's going to run in the background. Once you get your number between 1 and 10, he will open up a question for putting in a date. So Bob, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and take the screen back, okay? Well, I guess I will. What was the thing we were talking about? When in doubt, go ahead and just do it. So let's see if I can get back.
Steve, hold on. Steve, can you hear me?
I'm holding. Yes, I hear you. I'm holding.
I think we need to get this poll in.
Okay.
And then do the next poll, and then I can give you the screen back, if you don't mind.
Well, let me just talk to fill in here. As I transition from Charles, I'm wary a little bit of saying, well, injuries don't matter. I mean, Floor, when they do a meeting, always says, you know, we don't want anybody injured. And Space says, well, that's not practical. And the question then becomes, and they actually say, well, who in this room do you want to go home injured? So we all go, no, we don't want to do that. Now, Charles, exactly correct. So we'll build upon that is we don't beat upon the person who got injured. We don't beat upon the total recordable case rate. We look at, well, what led to these things? What am I doing to prevent injuries? Some folks do behavior-based safety, and that's a great source of metrics. We also do corrective action management. That's a great sort of metrics. We may do culture surveys. And it looks like we've been getting some good stuff in here. So part of the measurement thing is we need to step away from the outcome, perhaps, saying the outcome's important. I can't go to a CEO and say it doesn't matter if we make a profit or not. I can't go to a CEO and say it doesn't matter if you injure half your workers. So with that end in mind, how do we best get there? Bob, is that kind of clearance for me to get back to sharing screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so back we go. Hopefully I'll have to unmute myself based upon past experience here. Okay, I guess I'm still on, right? You hear me, Bob?
Loud and clear.
Great. So we'll move on to the next slide here. Come on. Okay, so yes, just give you a little some graphics about myself. I do work for Floor Corporation. We have a contract at Portsmouth, Ohio. I run their contractor assurance metrics. Interestingly enough, I've never physically been on site. And I've been running them for 7 years. I'm currently at the Savannah River National Laboratory where most of this story will reflect. And I also do support, I saw somebody with some Ottawa and we got some Bruce Power people. I do Canadian nuclear laboratories at Chalk River. In fact, I got to do some writing about some metrics tomorrow for them to work on safety culture. And the Canadians, I'm hoping some HPRCT, we can talk about this, have a wonderful regulatory document on culture. Now that sounds kind of like a disconnect, but they've really done a good job of it, in my opinion. I also do teach data analysis online for Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. And as I'll talk later, I'm always amazed during discussions, which is why these breakout sessions are so important, what insightful messages the students have come up with over the years. And yes, I'm with Savannah River National Laboratory right now. Of course, nobody likes to talk about problem times, but there was problem times at Savannah River National Laboratory. There was some significant issues that our Department of Energy customer was not pleased with what was going on. There were operational events within our functional areas of safety and quality. There was a lot of concerns about the performance and the management system. And in fact, the overall company of which I was part of, Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, they have this facility evaluation board, or IEB, that came in and, oh yes, they gave us a nice little present of core function weaknesses in what they call contractor assurance. A quick thing about contractor assurance, when I joined the DOE complex about 1993, the government was very, you will do things this way, contractor, and we will judge you on how you do those things. Well, of course, that took all the initiative away from the contractor. The contractor just had to do what was told. Well, we had that discussion earlier. And it evolved to, well, wait a minute, we've hired in best-in-class people. You should be telling us the best way to do this, and we will hold you accountable for that you will self-police yourself and all that. Hopefully the Idaho National Lab people, hopefully I've said about the right thing about contractor assurance. So there was concerns about, which fits in with HPRCT, about being self-critical, being able to find things by yourself, self-identification of problems and issues. And the metric system was very lagging. Yeah, we might have had an injury chart, but most of the charts were kind of like, well, you managers, you tell me what you want to tell me. And of course, everything had a positive spin to it. So At the time of the last year's conference in June 2019, within 6 months, we got a new CAS scorecard in place. We did weekly reports about the infamous corrective action management system. We did do an improved stoplight. Now, I'm wary sometimes these stoplights, like at the beginning of Homer Simpson's show, where, who is it, Lenny's on a ladder and they're changing the sign from 2 days to 3 days without an injury and Homer knocks him off the ladder. I used to visit a site near Hanford and there was not a real stoplight, but a television screen with a graphic of a stoplight in it, and under it was the guard. Of course, you know not to mess with somebody carrying a gun, but I would always ask, oh, so that stoplight I see is green. What does that mean? Well, there's no problems. I said, well, as a visitor, what would I do if that stoplight was red? Oh, I don't know. So those stoplight systems, you got to have some meat behind them and some trending. We can talk about that during question and answer if you like. We did bring in more staff, myself included. The line management committed to build up the support functions, and we did revitalize the management review boards. Management review boards, which are out there, if they're empowered properly and if management takes it seriously, they can be a very positive sign, and they are a place to leverage for human performance, for trying to get the management review boards on board. Even by June, we'd had some early signs of improvement. We're doing more observations. We're doing more reporting. And importantly, we were using statistical process control and still are using statistical process control with a simplified color coding. So we'll go into some of that. I just do want to say that the Independent Evaluation Board came back 12 months later, and I've got basically resume-worthy stuff. It's not just stuff I did. My co-workers within Contractor Assurance organization, certainly line management, the whole laboratory came together, and I'd say we're about 80% of the way there. There's still some tweaks to be done, and we're still doing them, but we leapt fast forward very much within 12 months. And so these are the formal words that we greatly improved the function of contractor assurance. They recognized we'd added the staffing, myself included. They recognized that we developed and implemented a comprehensive set of metrics. Now, this is not only just the outcomes of these events and injuries we're having, but the behaviors and the lower indicators going into them. And at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, we're working on some cultural type of metrics, again, that are enabled by the regulatory document that Ottawa developed. A lot of it was just accountability for the managers, accountability of you will go out and do observations, accountability of you said we should do these assessments. Did you apply the resources to do these assessments? So accountability for the managers existed, accountability for folks assigned to do things existed, not a blame culture, but a, hey, this is your job to make sure that we are doing sufficient observation and assessment and doing the real work too. I mean, sometimes I will admit you run into scientific researchers who are like, well, all you weenies do is keep me from making experiments. You put these safety rules in place. But there's more than enough lessons out there that if there's any place you need safety assurance, performance assurance, it is in research, because there are truly times where you're doing scary things. And I think Canada did have the phrase that says, we make things go boom safely. So that's always a caveat in there. Within Savannah River National Laboratory, we have about 200 supporting charts, reports, and files. And yes, I have to dive into it Thursday. It takes me about 3 working days to do some conceptual trending. I look at quality of corrective actions, the straight measurements, and then of course you have to write all this up and try to say, what does this mean? Now, of course, you need help from the line managers to know, well, hey, I noticed this little thing here. What's going on there? Oh, funny, you should notice that. Here's the story. So yes, part of the metrics is the story. Statistical process control, which I'll show you a thing about, is sometimes like, why do I want to do this? my own, how did I get into this was I was hired at Hanford Tank Farms as a maintenance supervisor. About 4 months in, the government was beating up the contractor at the time, I won't name it, that they did not have good performance metrics. They had a high maintenance backlog, things like that. And they had brought in some Deming people who worked with Dr. Deming and said, we ought to make control charts of cycle times of planning documents. And the contractor said, we don't have anybody who knows how to do that. Well, they brought some folks in because I had the operations research degree. They said, hey, go keep these contractors happy, make the government happy, you know, do their 2-day training. So I was in their 2-day training. We compared notes. Yeah, I knew what a statistical process control chart was. Went back to work, and about a week later got a phone call at noon when I was on swing shift that said, get in here now and start making control charts. Now that's the entirety of my job description. In June of 1993, I got a phone call at noon that said, get in here now and start making control charts. Because again, the contractor told the government, we don't have anybody who knows how to do that. And the consultant said, oh, yes, you do. And his name is. So you never know what's going to happen. So instead of being a maintenance supervisor, I'm a statistician. I will admit in some cultures, sometimes I'm fearful of the company would rather say, I don't have anybody who knows how to do that, therefore I can't, rather than knowing there's somebody around who can do it. So we do simplify to red, yellow, green, as I'll show you, and this does get out to the managers. Here's just some example charts. They are from our corrective action management system. We do keep, well, how many things get entered into corrective action management? Now back here is where the laboratory was having difficulties and we weren't getting much information out. And here was the increase in doing some. That was starting to go down, but what this is you're seeing is the COVID. And we were challenged with, well, how do I do observations and find things? And, you know, we are now focusing on, well, how do I prevent COVID and looking at some of the COVID things, and our jobs are ramping back up. This chart, which is red, and oh my word, I'm actually allowed to show you a red chart. That's, you know, I try to get people to say red is our friend. And I wish I could have you all in a room and make you all repeat after me, you know, unmute yourself and say red is our friend, but I don't think we'll do that. However, in here, there was some higher level, higher significance things going on that we were allowed to very quickly determine happened because we had been running about 2 events a month. We got down to about 1 every other month, but then we had 2 months in a row at 2, which turned out to be a signal that we were able to detect. If we just threw this all together, just as bars or worse, a moving average like they show in a lot of these COVID things, you would never have detected that trend. And Bob, I do see, I think, some chat going on. If you need to interrupt with a question, just go ahead and jump in, please. Down here, we have some supporting Pareto charts to say, well, 1, which is red, surprisingly, is the most significant thing that can happen. A T is a trend only. So we've got kind of a ranking by risk, and SE stands for self-evaluation. So we do a lot of self-evaluation of things. In fact, the low level is way off the top of the screen, whereas our external sources like the the independent review board, issue investigations for minor events, occurrence reports or bigger events, things the customer tells us are pretty well down in the grass compared to what we're self-identifying. And this does allow me also to say, oh boy, those people Idaho, I'm sure are familiar with the 3 words, conduct of operations. Interesting story on chemical and life cycle management. We were having some chemical safety issues that would have been detected. They hired in 2 new chemical safety officers, and boy, did they go to town writing things about chemical safety. We've learned a lot. Yes, we had some increasing trends in terms of the chemical safety corrective actions, but we're able to go, well, that was a good thing because we brought these people in, and now I've got information about chemical safety. So as we move forward, looking ahead, there is a whole new set of Department of Energy contracts coming out. The Savannah River National Laboratory has been successful enough that they've been rated to split off as their own entity. So as a corporate person, I need to go back to FLOR projects like perhaps FLOR Idaho, who I've helped. But I do need to turn over to the people who are there about, okay, how do we continue to move ahead with corrective action quality? That's been a major thing that has been, and we have it on our executive scorecard as a primary metric, is the quality of corrective actions, which unfortunately I'm the person who has to do the grading. And sometimes I do feel like there's a few people with tell us that we did the right thing. But I do get to actually say, well, this corrective action really didn't address the causes. You fixed the symptom. Somebody didn't sign something. You got it signed. Yeehaw, but why are we failing to sign these things? What's the meaning of that? So trying to move into the causal analysis piece and say, okay, what were the causes? Are we really really dealing with them? The human performance, development of the actions that deal with the causes rather than the symptoms. And do you have proof that you actually did this? Or is this just, yeah, I turned in the procedure change. Well, did it ever get published? Well, and that's really happened to us. And then, of course, training the incumbent and incoming CAS team to continue on with this process. A little note about education. I did start teaching for Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Go Salukis. I do have my Virginia Tech Go Hokies. I wrote halftime shows my senior year in school, just as a bit of a break. So you're not talking statistics. By the way, over my other shoulder is the Burn Hills and Big Flats Railroad, which occupies the rest of this room. And we actually, I've given classes at National Model Railroad Association conventions about statistics and model railroad operations, and actually had 100-person standing room only for a clinic about statistics and model railroading, if you can believe that. This was the most dreaded course for students. I would have people introduce themselves, and this was all online, and they'd say, yeah, I put this course off to absolutely dead last, you know, this is horrible. But I did discover the course objectives were not, what's the equation of a Poisson distribution, but it was more, how do you make management decisions from data? So I got the math kind of downgraded. You'll get an A if you can do the math, but you can easily get a C if you can join in the discussion boards, talk about Dr. Deming, talk about the red bead experiment, that class I'm currently teaching. They won't let me get out of it, which is good. My mentors who work with Dr. Deming, they actually have joined in and take questions from the students. The students love it. So I often find the students get it, and I'm always amazed at some of the stuff they come up with, and the laborers get it. What sometimes happens is I run into managers that go, oh, this statistical process control is too hard to explain, and the workers will never understand it. Well, unfortunately, it's the managers who don't understand it and don't want it to be told, you got a stable and predictable system. And I think even Charles said that this morning, the system is built to deliver the results you're getting. And that you can really nail down with statistical process control. So that's an important part of HPRCT, is the trend that kind of nails that down. And once you can get some managers on board with that, and yes, it does take, you know, socialization and things like that, it moves forward. I can tell more stories about that, but let's move along. So, this is a control chart. I always loved that. I was in Army ROTC, and a colonel stood up and whapped his pointer on a map that was on the board. This is a map. Oh boy, that was not an exciting hour about how to do orienteering, if anybody's ever had to take a compass. And what was the old phrase, never trust a second lieutenant with a compass and a map. Of course, I was training to be a second lieutenant, but I kind of dived out of that to go dive in submarines. Whew. Now, so here is a control chart. It's very simple. You just plot the data as it occurs. You throw the average on it, and you throw a 3 standard deviation upper control limit. That comes from 1930 and Dr. Schuhart. You throw on a 3 standard deviation lower control limit, and I can predict the future. If nothing changes in this process, and I got enough history here, 25 points, it says likely nothing's going to change, then I know whatever it is, let's say it's injuries per month, I'm going to have no more than 21 a month. I'm going to have no less than 1. Notice that lower control limit says I'm never going to hit 0 is the prediction. If I were to hit 0, that would be a signal that something changed. But you can use this for risk management, because in the worst case period, it would be, look, yeah, we had a month here with about 18 injuries, but we could hit 21. Now, boss, if we had 21 injuries in a month, would we get shut down? Would we be on the headlines of the newspapers, be in all these things we don't want to be? And so, yes, I get away from reacting to my ups and downs, which is my bad T, and I work on stability. Or if I have a trend, I figure out, well, this is the time where management can say those 2 dreaded words, what happened? So we're going to look at your data. I've tried to keep this purposely short so we can play with some data. We're going to look at those random numbers you chose and say, well, did the people at the beginning tend to pick lower numbers than the people at the end? Might be that the early people like low numbers and the late people like high numbers, or vice versa. Let's test that. Don't know. And here's a more interesting question. Are they really random? People tend to go to the middle. Did you tend to not choose 10s? Did you tend to not choose 1s? So Bob, I think that was you going, so I'm going to hit stop share. Well, I guess I should first ask, how'd the Excel file come out I built?
It came out okay, and I apologize. I thought I was on mute. I apologize for clearing my throat.
Well, that's one of those nice little, I mean, that's the thing with not having an audience. Bob would be waving his hands in the audience. Okay, I'm ready. And so we get the hum. Okay, enough of that. Let me hit stop share so Bob can share. Take it away,
now,
Bob.
Steve, for your sake, I hope this works.
Well, that's why I had the picture of the guy without a safety net. Well, that was weird. Did that actually sort per date? You put the date poll on the date poll page, right?
Yeah, this is the trend poll. I mean, this is the 0 to 1.
The 0 to 10.
0 to 10. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to play with this because this tells me either the people who did choose numbers later did choose higher numbers, or perhaps we've got a data problem, because this was supposed to, the interesting limitation of the survey data, and this is an interesting lesson, is it really just collapses it all into one picture. You know, like the words we did in the early thing. We tested this out to try to get the dates in sequence, and it's not an absolute up ramp here. But right now it's saying that it averages about 6.5, which is interesting. People did tend towards the higher numbers. Looked like 7, and we're going to analyze this a little more, was more. But this thing automatically put in the average and the control limits, and we can obviously see, we don't need the statistical process control, that there was an increasing trend with time, if that really existed. The fact that the early data goes like 2, 1, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3 is kind of odd, shall we say. Now, this perhaps says the lesson of it's more important what you do with the numbers than what the numbers are. We're able to look at this and go, I'm suspecting something didn't go right with the numbers, and that is the claim I need to take away from this. We could perhaps look at this and email a copy of this later, but I would have expected the numbers to be a little more random than that, especially after we got about halfway through. Yeah, okay, somebody actually, now this is how this works. When somebody just put in a chat that said, well, I was an early person and I chose the number 8. Now that's beautiful. Actually, in this failure, we're learning something, is that if we go, this is strange, this shouldn't have happened, and somebody raises their hand and said, well, I'm an example of, I put an early number 8 in. You did paste that. Go over to the paste, put data here, the far left-hand page.
Okay.
I want to see what it looks like. put 1 to 10 data here. So that thing, okay, that is, yeah, you see that tended to sort. Something went wrong with my sort routine. I'll play with that later, but bring us back to the 1 to 10 trend page. So this is actually working out better as a lesson. Bob and I tested this. I thought the thing would sort in the time sequence that things occurred. The fact that it hasn't, and it's done it very sporadically, says, okay, I do have a data problem. And in fact, we got somebody to admit to, but I turned in an early number 8. So this is the way the process should work. Let's look at now let's see if we can resurrect this, and let's look at the 1 to 10 distribution. So this is an interesting chart here. Now, this illustrates the difficulty of a lot of people just make histograms of data, and they'll go, well, this is kind of interesting, but if you don't look at the time sequence like we did, you don't notice that there's a trend going on. And where this really occurs, I had this story told to me at a rocket dine, who was actually rocket engineers, were drilling O-rings in a missile booster stage, and when they put the distribution of the hole sizes in, the thing made a nice bell-shaped curve, and they thought everything is good, but they kept exceeding the hole size limit because they weren't accounting for a time series thing which is going on. And if anybody has drilled into metal before, you know your drill bit wears away and the hole gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller with time, and you won't detect it on a chart like this. Now, what is very interesting about this chart is everybody's favorite number seems to be 7. I would have expected, Bob, you can kind of hover your arrow over the black line. Since there were 10 numbers and we did this, I would expect 10% of each number to come out. And we could see that in the data that people's favorite number is 7. I would have never thought that. And notice it hits right there at that 3 standard deviation upper control limit. So you all failed. Now, I failed a little bit with the previous chart, but you didn't follow directions, audience. You didn't choose random numbers. Anybody want to comment on that? Where's one of my people who chose 7? Who's brave? Who wants to unmute themselves? Who chose 7? Okay.
This is Jessica. Isn't there a psychological study that proves that the majority of people will choose the number 7 if given the choice in a 1 to 10 scale?
That is potentially true there, because I've always heard 7 is a lucky number. In craps, you're shooting for 7. And there was anything more, Jessica? I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Nope, that was the extent of it. Thanks.
Well, that's a very good piece of information. Again, this is why as a group, we have a study that says 7 is more commonly chosen. Okay. There actually was a TV show where a guy was a statistician type of guy and did these crime analyses and stuff. But as a demonstration in the TV show, they told people to randomly distribute themselves through the room. And the person who was overseeing it said, well, you all failed because you're all standing equally distant apart. That's not random. Okay, good. Somebody's willing to say that they chose their favorite number instead of a random number. Now, I don't understand what a Ronaldo fan is.
Hi there, it's Sonny. Cristiano Ronaldo, soccer player. His number is 7. So I just picked my favorite soccer player's jersey number.
Okay, so notice what's happened here. We gave the direction to choose random numbers. In fact, the number 1, you'd think the winner number is the lowest. And the number, I didn't have my random number generator handy. By the way, there's no such thing as a random number generator. They're all pseudo-random number generators. Yep, Bedford's Law. Yes, yes. No, that's another thing to look up. That's homework. Go look up I think it's Bedford's Law. So 7, we can see from this chart, hit the 3 standard deviation upper control limit. Well, Jason says guilty as well as having chosen 8. More random would have been 4. Well, you each only get to choose one number. So this demonstration has worked very well. We can show here that 7 is an unusual number and was chosen at a high rate. And maybe we can try to understand that. Now, yeah. Oh, that's another good point. We were seeing the data as it came in. So people are throwing out some good ideas. So you see how the synergy works when you get the data out in front of people and show it in a format like this and say, well, why did you choose 7? Well, we're learning a lot of reasons why people chose 7. Can you imagine if you've got the operational data for what's your causes of injuries, what's your causes of delays, what's your causes of events, what causes you to not make a profit? You get that out in front of people, you can start having this conversation that we're having. Okay, I like that, Bob. Well, drum roll, please. Let's look at the low rate trend. James Bond loves something, somebody says. Oh, I love it. Okay, now I want to give, and I always give credit to people. There's a great book by Dr. Don Wheeler. He's from the University of Tennessee. It's called Understanding Variation, the Key to Managing Chaos. And he actually has a method by which, and in fact, I visited him as his booth because we at the DOE were having trouble with, we'd have these events that would only happen a couple times a year, but we were always challenged with, well, how do we know if any are close together or not? Now, of course, you go to a vendor's booth and you say, how do I do something? What do you suppose Dr. Wheeler's answer was? He held up a book and said, buy this book. And he also pointed out to me where in the book, which is about 3/4 back, where this technique is. Now, it's very odd. Now, this time the sort worked. And, okay, we have 2 people. Okay, this is interesting. 2 people chose the same date. Notice February 17th, 2010 was important to 2 people. And we also have September the 3rd, 2010 was important to 2 people. And we have some days that are 1 day apart, September 28 and September 29. Notice the rest. Now that has skewed, Bob, if you can point out the black line. Now, one thing we notice here is most of the data is below the average. And in fact, there's a rule that is 7 points in a row below average is a trend, as I'll show you on a coming up screen. So we know that this is an unusual distribution, and we have 3 points above the upper control limit. So it is very interesting that 2 people chose the same, two pairs of people chose the same date. That's interesting. It goes back to 2010. So we have again shown I can use a statistical analysis to say if this was actually an event rate chart, I'd be very concerned about that. Those 2010 events, are they couples? Good question, people. Okay, got you guys thinking. Do we have any people who are married or they were couples and have a common date? No one chose 9/11. That's interesting. I suppose when I said choose a date, I don't know if anybody would want to choose 9/11. So this again says this is a very simple thing I can do with data. Now this chart also is a good illustration of, well, oh, good. Somebody knows the instructions. 2001 wasn't in the last 10 years. I love it. Okay, so we've done this exercise. We identified that 2 couples of people identified the same date, which is pretty statistically unusual. They were both in 2010. That's very unusual. So if this was like a number of plant fires over time, if this was spills, and I want to go back, although 2010 might be too old, but you never know, what was going on in 2010, and then what did happen in September 2020 that led to 2 events really close to each other. Otherwise, things are pretty well, feels like yesterday. Things are pretty well stable otherwise. Now, I have to, as a statistician, know to throw out those 3 points and recalculate the average control limit. So this is something about you do need some knowledge to do these statistics. A downside a lot of times is people go, well, the answer must be right. I used Steve's formula and got this answer. Well, you got to know what it's doing. I hear that a lot with Minitab. I'm sorry if there's a manufacturer of Minitab there, but I have over the years heard so much of, I threw the data in the Minitab and it spat this out, so it must be right. Well, there's a little more to the story. So I'm going to declare that a success, and let's go back to the presentation. And we've got about 10 more minutes, so this is good. Start thinking of questions you want to ask about this. So what did we find out? There was a trend in a sequence of numbers, but I think the source of that was a data manipulation problem, which must be a problem with the formulas that I put in. Or something happened that Bob and I didn't expect, but we did get a signal. This again is, we may have monitored the wrong thing, but we learned something from it. So no matter what the metric is, you can learn something with the metric, even if it is, I shouldn't ever do that again. Your data were not random. 7 seemed to be a very popular number, did seem to be skewed towards the higher numbers. Very few people chose 1. That's interesting. Again, this is more of a parlor trick at the moment, but imagine if that was real operational data. It gives me insight. And so we will supply the Excel file, and I probably should take the time to fix that and see what it is in the time sequence that people did the 1 through 10. All right, let me get this to advance. So there is the set of rules that do vary from author, and actually for those in the nuclear industry, I had my work plagiarized by the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators and copyrighted by them. All this stuff that I do, since the government paid for it, is open domain. So if you search for me, you'll find in OSTI, which is the Office of Science and Technology, a lot of papers I've written that are just out there open domain. But INPO 07007, Performance Assessment and Trending, does contain the Hanford trending rules that I wrote back at Hanford, and we still use at Chalk River in Canada. We still use at Savannah River and Portsmouth, Ohio. And these are the rules, and I always do this just to be humorous. 1 point outside the control limits, 2 out of 3 points outside of 2 standard deviations above or below average, 4 out of 5 points, 1 standard deviation above or below average, 7 points in a row above or below average, 10 out of 11 points all in a row all above or below average, 7 points in a row all increasing or decreasing. Yeah. But what's more important about these rules, and they do modify a little bit. Dr. Wheeler, by the way, uses 8 points the same side of the average, not 7. And Minitab and the Western Electric rules and the Six Sigma folks tend to use 9. And I can talk about Chebyshev's inequality versus normal distributions and explain some of that, but we won't go there. Pretend I did. But here's the thing, a big shift of 3 standard deviations, which is what Dr. Schuhart came up with. He said experience shows this is the right number to use. A big shift in a single point we declare to be a trend. Now at about 2 standard deviations, I need to get 2 out of 3 points. At 1 standard deviation or sigma, I need 4 out of 5 points. And this curve kind of goes on down. Probably should be asymptotic, but you know, it's hard to say a 1/4 of a point. So we do have the 7 points on the same side of the average and the 10 out of 11. So a subtle, slow shift, but that lasts a long time is a trend. A very steep shift in a short period of time is a trend, and a various in between. This is kind of the, if anything, take a screenshot of this. This is the entirety of the model that we've been talking about. And I went through this at Colorado Springs. This was going to be a tabletop demonstration, a poster session for this past year. Hopefully I can do this as a poster session. But here we go. No matter what it is, we gather the data. We throw it in the statistical process control and say, is it stable? Well, just we found out that it wasn't stable. So we look at the context and severity. You all did a really good job with the context, and we know the severity was, well, who cared? We chose random numbers. Now, however, if I got data like mosquito bites, assuming no Zika virus, perhaps my severity is so low that, you know, mosquito bites are pretty much, oh, I don't care if they happen. Why am I even measuring it versus days away from work, perhaps? So there's always a severity context here. is I have my trend, is it in the correct direction? Now, if it's going the wrong way, this is where I turn it over to the root cause analysis people and say, look, something's changed. We used to be at this level, but now we're at this level. Back in 2010, we had these two events really close together. I think we better do a root cause analysis on those 4 events or that period of time. What was going on in 2010 that was so important? And then do my corrective actions. Now, in a positive direction, you also want to say reinforce and lessons learned. And again, in the example like I gave, well, we had more chemical safety findings. Well, that could have been a good thing, but we want to get the context of it. Over in the stable side, and this is the tough part, but this is where your customer expectations come in. You know, how many of this is acceptable or not acceptable? You may do a probabilistic risk assessment. You may do the, well, if everybody else is doing it, I'll do it too. But over here, when I got a stable system, corrective action management won't work. Let's say you turn on the TV and go, I don't like that show, change channel, turn on TV, you know, go next channel, I don't like that, change channel, change channels, change channel. Well, your remote is a corrective action management tool, but if you're doing nothing to create a new show, you're never going to find one you like. So this is where I turn it over to the human performance and continuous improvement people and say, oh my word, go talk to the workers and figure out what change to implement and do it. And the big thing is we go back to the start and say, well, did my change cause an improving trend? So this thing is a complete life cycle of a system. All right, thoughts to consider. And then I will turn this over to questions. Joe Esty, we were great friends back at Hanford, and I did know at one of the last virtual meetings, he pushed for, am I using my metrics for compliance and inspection or learning? And I would say there is times for inspection and compliance metrics. Am I compliant? How many times does my customer say, you know what, messed up? We need that feedback. We need the idea of, okay, I did these inspections and golly gee whiz, I got too many red beads. Now that's a reference to the Dr. Deming red bead experiment. Google Prevette and red beads. Sometimes you'll see a 1-hour video we did at Hanford on the red bead experiment, or am I doing it for learning? Both are valid means. Learning with no improvement doesn't make any money. Compliance with no learning is not successful. I really have to have a little bit of both. And this brings up a cartoon at the Naval Postgraduate School, which a character is reading the Data Cookbook, Secrets for Success. Step 1, determine final answer. Step 2, solve for methodology. I hope some people are laughing, but there might be a somewhat of a serious message there, because it's like, well, what is the answer I'm trying to get to? How do I reduce injuries? Well, what's my methodology to reduce injuries? Tell everybody to stop reporting? No. And so my statement is, which I kind of used as a teaser going in here, and Dean, I'm about ready to give it to you. It is more important how you use the measures than what the measures are. And we did that with Bob back earlier. So Dean, what do we got for people who have questions?
Well, let's see what hands we have coming up. So I'm going to pause there for a second. So we've got a lot of commentary in the chat box, a lot of energy. Right. Let's see what kind of hands we have popping up with questions. Got to be one or two.
I have a question.
Okay,
Bob. I'm asking the right guy this question, Stephen. HPRCT.
Yes.
Of course, T stands for trending.
Right.
Do you know how difficult it's been to get people to talk about trending in the last 5 or even more than that years?
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Well, some of it, and I've taught MBA courses, a lot of the behaviors you see from your managers are because of the Masters of Business Administration curricula that schools have. Basically, they follow the kick, you know what, and take names. That's what they're taught in MBA programs. I've never seen such a competitive bunch of students as the MBA classes I had to teach. They don't cooperate. So there is an American culture, which is reinforced by our colleges, of competition, not cooperation. Now, another part of the story is, if I'm a manager and I have my table grid here that shows all my financial results, I go, now as you can clearly see, this number is higher than that number, and this number was higher than that number because of my fine leadership. Let me channel Donald Trump here, but when the statistician goes, but sir, that's just random noise, what happens to the statistician? So people want there to be a reason for why two numbers are different. Steve's rule is, given two numbers, they will be different. So that's a piece of the puzzle. Sometimes they're a little scared of the technical person. The other thing, and Bob, you and I talked about this a little bit too, is that we tend to be very personality driven as these experts. And I've literally had people say, well, Steve, you can understand that. Us mere mortals can't. And I'm like, oh, I failed. If you think I'm somehow, well, maybe I'm magically wired to think numbers. Bob, what was your name again? No. The idea is this is understandable, and you give this to people in the line and they go, aha, this is what's happening. How's that, Bob?
So real quickly, that means you're saying that we don't have as much participation with trending papers and presentations because people think that it's up to statistician type experts, and that's why?
Well, there's a piece of that. Now, Dr. Deming did say you need a master's statistician on board. But me as a master statistician, I guess hopefully I can wear that hat, is I should be giving this knowledge to other people. That's not what's happening. People see, and of course, Six Sigma killed the statistical profession because it was pay $35,000, make this guy a black belt, he'll solve all your problems for you. I apologize to any black belts there. So there's a lot going on here. It's not a simple answer. It's a cultural issue. You didn't use the line I gave there. I actually have a video. Donald Trump was doing a campaign speech. He got talking about statisticians, and he actually said, I love statisticians, but they have the most boring job in the world. Dean laughs.
Yeah, I didn't use that in the intro. I'm sorry about that, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah. Okay, let's get somebody else to talk, though.
Yeah, let's see if we have any other hands up or anybody that wants to chat a question into the chat box. And I guess while we're waiting for that, Steve.
Yeah, I could tell a story.
I wonder if so my question is,
okay,
based on where you sit and what you've seen, are people more trusting in data and predictive analytics now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, less so, same? What kind of trust in data do you see?
Well, oddly enough, my mentors were asked that by the Deming Institute, and they said they see the use of data going downhill except for a certain person at the Savannah River site. But the other thing is, look at what's happening with COVID and the whole issue, the science behind COVID and the science behind the vaccine. It's become massively politicized. I mean, I feel for Dr. Fauci. At least he's old enough. He can just say, screw this. I'm done. But, I sometimes feel like on the receiving end of the Donald Trump stuff that got given to Dr. Fauci. So we do have this distrust of the data wonks. And there isn't that, as we talked about, a line locker, that go between of, okay, here is the data wonk and here's the line manager. And I think I can kind of translate that. And I saw some chat messages go by. So what do we got?
Well, a couple things, but first we'll go back to Sonny.
Hey, Sonny, what you got?
Hey, Steve, really appreciated your talk. Very insightful, very thought-provoking. Just wanted to get your thoughts on a white paper I read around predictive analytics for workplace safety. It talks about 4 pillars around, predictive analytics in that space. And they talked about the number of observations, the cross-functionality of the observations, and the criticality of those observations. If you have too many all safe or not critical enough. Those are 4 kind of indicators of potential events. I just wanted to get your insight on that, as well as any other thoughts around predictive analytics. We've got to focus on observation and coaching, but I'd like to get some more insight. Thanks.
Well, it is interesting to say predictive analytics, because when you say that, I think like reliability-centered maintenance, that, you know, what can I go out and actually measure? Now, you are, though, correctly bringing up observation. Use your eyes. What do you see? Talk to the people. What do you hear? And are you willing to hear that? Which we kind of ended up talking about that this morning. So yes, I do need to read. Sometimes I got to do that, read the observations and say, where are these been at? But what we want to do is practice the good catch program and give people public praise for, you did this observation, you found this issue, we fixed the issue. That if that is praised with positive consequences, that will beget more. Oh, well, what did we find here? What can we do about this? So observation is important. Sometimes we do a disfavor by quantifying it, like doing the Likert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 scale. You know, rate this on scale 1 to 10. As we just discovered, people don't think linearly. Always ask them strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. But definitely, I'm a very strong proponent of observation-based metrics. How many observations am I doing? Yes, what percent of them actually identify an issue? What percent of them, more importantly, identify a good thing, a good practice that we can share? What is the value of those observations? And that can be tough. That you got to have a safe zone for. Did that answer your question, Sonny?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, very good question. I appreciate it. What else we got, Dean?
Well, and thanks, Sonny. So everybody else, raise your hand, jump in. But from the chat box, somebody chatted in that early on, Steve, you talked about the need for the story behind the data.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, you have to have context, I think is the more technical word. So as I told the story, we hired in chemical safety officers who suddenly can do observations and know what global harmonized standard labeling is. And oh my God, oh my word, I'm sorry, OMG. Oh, we ended up with all these chemical deficiencies. The world is coming to an end. Well, no, we did this on purpose because, and we got what we wanted. This is a success. So yes, you have to have the backstory or the story that we were getting from folks about the number 7. I have to admit, I knew from being a kid, 7 is a lucky number, but I did not expect the result of 7 being the number everybody chose. So we got a nice backstory from some people about the importance of the number 7.
Yeah, it is interesting. So another one, Steve, and this is, I think, both a comment and maybe a little bit of a question about tools. So the comment is, some of our challenge in the nuclear industry with trending is related to the fact that we have such a large wealth of data, and we tools that are automated and quickly able to identify trends that are emerging, so they can be something people act on. So I think it's certainly a great insight, but maybe there's some thoughts about tools or how to manipulate, leverage, trends in that capacity.
Well, to a certain extent, you've got to filter through all that data, and the SBC will help. I will admit, I was with a company that worked with a certain partner of Sherlock Holmes, it's named, and they had all these whiz kids with their Python stuff, and they were just going through the data. And all they were identified, I kept telling them this, you're just bringing me out random data. You're bringing me out random results. You've got to understand. You see, the problem is with big data. Now you got me started. Big data has become a mantra over the last 10 years, and there's a certain logic that says, I have all the data in the world. I don't need to understand statistical distributions and probabilities. I have all the data I need. I just got to mine it and get the answer. The problem is you don't have the data that occurs 1 second from now.
Yeah.
We are trying, the real job of trending, and this is what Dr. Deming said was a job of management. The job of management is prediction. And I predict the future and then answer the question of, I don't want that predictive future. This is a point of Dr. Russ Akoff. It's not just predicting the future, but it's also saying I need to make the decision. I can't live with this prediction. The upper control limit of 21 injuries a month, I can't live with that. I got to change the system. So what is missing amongst a lot of the latest things on big data and data mining is, yeah, sure, I get the coupon book from Kroger that is made by a statistician and all these algorithms that says, here, you buy a lot of ice cream. Here's a free pint of ice cream. Okay, well, that's pretty good, but it's not really, it's trying to influence my future performance. But again, in the nuclear industry, we're trying to predict what is my future performance. Did that kind of cover that, Dean?
Well, I think, from my perspective, it did. So thank you. And I appreciate that. And I'm looking for any more hands. And
I have one more question, Dean.
Go ahead,
Go for it, Bob.
What aren't people trending that they ought to be trending?
Ooh, what do we not know?
No, wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
From your perspective,
Yes, what are we not measuring?
You're the trending guru,
Yep.
and you look out there and you see organizations that aren't collecting certain things that they should be.
Right. Well,
what are those things?
Okay. Well, I do want to make this comment. I went to a facility where they have the visual workplace boards, and they had all this stuff on their boards, and then they give us a presentation saying, we don't know what to measure for our metrics. And I said, look behind you. It's on the board. You've got suggestion program, you got this, you got that. So sometimes the data is right under their nose, and they don't know they got the metric. I will admit I was in an intensive care center because my mother, who unfortunately did not survive this, but it was amazing to see the level of care and the level of detail that was on the boards at this intensive care center. But I have to admit, I had to get out of, looking at my mother on a respirator. So I did actually ask a nurse, so where's your metrics person? Well, they're not quite here. I said, well, how come they're not doing statistical process control like the Joint Commission says to do? Well, yeah, we're supposed to be doing that, but. So everybody has this excuse where I've got all this data, but I don't use it. So really, I don't think the problem is you don't have the data. Now, I will say once you start in the data world, then you start going, well, yeah, if I did this observation, if I developed this observation card, but it's more of a, oh, I learned from the data I've on hand. What do I do? So my answer is what happens is people pay a lot for data that they have on hand and they don't use it. So I'm not that concerned about what data you don't have. Exploit the data you have first, then we can fill in the gaps.
Interesting. Okay, we have, so Bob, thanks for the question. Steve, thanks for
good
the answer.
question.
And I'm going to Cassie next. Cassie, your hand's up. What's your question? What do you think?
I guess the question I have is, in your eyes, has it been more valuable to do trending of lagging or leading indicator metrics, and or is it more powerful to then draw the correlations between the two?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I mean, I need to understand, again, the C-suite knows profit, knows injury rates, knows compliance rates. You got to know what those things are doing. Now, to be successful there, you got to know what the leading indicators are doing. What's my behavior-based safety? What's my observations? What's my housekeeping inspections? You name it. So the answer is both. I need a balance of both. And yes, I've had some pretty good ways of saying, in fact, one of the best leading indicators was safety and health concerns submitted by the employees. Actually, when they dried up, you knew something was wrong. When you got a lot of them, you knew something was wrong. And by the way, back at Hanford, the best survey question we had, which was just correlated beautifully to performance, is a very simple question. It's easy. Here's the question. Management, senior management, parenthesis above my manager, visits my place of work. Now that sounds like an innocuous question. I've been told, Steve, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. But for some darn reason at that plant, at that time, if people said their senior management wasn't visiting their place of work, something else was wrong. And the vice president could go, but I go there every day. Well, they don't acknowledge that. So sometimes, yes, the answer is yes. You've got to have your mix of indicators and what's important to you. There's no magic. You know, I'm amazed how many times people want to come away from these presentations with, Steve, give me the magic list of measures. Look on your computer. Did that help? I know you got to put up with me a little bit this morning, but I do want to, I always like to follow up and say, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it helps. I mean, obviously we know there's no magic button, but I guess I was just more curious from your perspective, if you leaned more towards one way or the other with the lagging or the leading.
No, balance is important, I would say. You got to be very balanced in your balance.
That is a good way to wrap up that question. Be balanced in your balance. Cassie, thank you for the question.
Thank you, Cassie.
Let's pause one more second, see if any last minute hands go up before we go into a break. And I'm not seeing any popping up or any other questions going on in the chat box. So everybody, thank you for the questions that you had, and thanks for the energetic typing in the chat box and the thought sharing. Steve, thank you for your insights and expertise. And and we'll all be back here in 27 minutes time, 3:30 Eastern, for another round of breakout groups.
Right. And I want to hear some really good stuff from these breakout sessions. As I said, my blow my students away here, please.
Awesome.
See you in a bit.
See everybody in 27 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. And hope everybody enjoyed that nice, refreshing break. And now we're going to get into some breakout group discussions, similar to what we did earlier, but different. So what we're going to do is I will break you up into groups of, looks like 5 or 6. Again, they will be different than the breakout groups you were in this morning. However, when we get back into the second of the 2 breakout groups we'll do this afternoon, you should be in the same groups. So that's just a long way to say, hopefully you're consistently put into the same group that I'm going to put you in a few minutes, and then in about half an hour. But it's the same sort of format. But what we want to do this time is, and I'll share my screen out, is we want to focus on, first off, key insights that you had from Steve's discussion. So hold on 1 minute. So I want you to focus on key insights that you had from Steve's discussion. So we'll spend about 10 minutes doing that. So the first group is takeaways, insights. What did you hear? What really resonated with you? What things did you hear that are really, really powerful, one way or the other? And then we'll come back, we'll do a bit of a debrief on that. Steve can give us some of his thoughts about what he heard with themes, maybe some opportunities to build on. We'll go back into a second breakout group and talk specifically about actions. How can we put these things into place? What steps can we take in our respective organizations? And then we'll do a second debrief on that. So with that, I will, knowing that the screen share doesn't work when you're in the breakout groups, I'm going to put you in the breakout rooms, and then I'll send just one very brief set of instructions as an announcement. So with that, I'm going to put you into your breakout groups and look for a little more detail when you're there. Please chat if you need any help or have questions when you're in there, or ask for help with the Ask for Help button, and I'll join you. So thank you, and I will see you in about 10 to 12 minutes back in this larger group. Looks like we have almost everybody back. So if you haven't already, please go to pollev.com, 2019 HPRCT, and just give us the one word or the short phrase that expresses your key insights or your key takeaways from Steve's presentation. And Bob Nelms, if you want to share out the results, we'd love to see them when you're ready. And as those are starting to be shared out, Steve, I'm going to start with you. So I'd like you to just start looking at what you're seeing on the screen.
Okay.
And
I saw the word context go by, and that's the story is there. So again, the soft side of the metrics. What else am I seeing now as it's filling up here? Analysis, okay, analytics, very technical. I mean, we had even the discussion in our group, which I think I railroaded somebody into speaking, but the left brain, right brain connection.
Okay.
But anyway, embrace. Now that's an interesting word, embrace. That's a very emotional, loving type of word. Of course, I see the word red. Okay. What do we got? Embrace is interesting. As I say, context, leading. Of course, we've been talking about leading indicators. What's some of the small words here? Storytelling.
Exactly. I see storytelling. I see behaviors, which is also.
Yes. Is it spelled the Canadian way or it's spelled the American way? Okay, where's the Canadians? You're supposed to know how to spell behavior. Green, we got somebody putting green signals. Now, signals is good. Signal to noise ratio and some of that comes up. Okay.
So let's start with, and I want to go back to as we're getting more and more, but Steve, I'm going to hone in on that thought about embrace. What do you, before anybody wants to give us any additional commentary on that one, what does embrace tell you?
Embrace is kind of like embrace the story, embrace what the numbers are, it's almost an ownership, but it's also a loving ownership, shall we say. You don't usually say love and statistics in the same sentence, but it is it's an interesting word again in embracing, big picture, seeing and hearing what's happening and listening, which I need to, shift to listening here at some point. But I like the word embrace. It would be interesting to hear from some of the folks who wrote the word embrace.
Yeah, let's
garbage.
Get a volunteer for somebody that used the word embrace or thought the word embrace as you had that discussion in your breakout groups. If you could give us a little more insight into that one, we'd love to hear it.
This is Kristen Duggins, and actually it went along with embrace the red. Someone had mentioned that in the chat, and I really took away from that because, we look at the red and they're like, oh, and then you look at the green and you have all these positive feelings, but then someone in the chat, and I don't recall the name, said, embrace the red and challenge the green. And I took that away from, and so there's where the embrace went. So sorry if that caused a little bit of confusion, but I really liked that.
I really love that answer because that does incorporate the bad news of the red, which people see red and go, I don't want any reds, versus embracing the red. Okay, that's a good story.
Yeah, it is. And thank you, Kristen, for jumping in there. Patricia Fisher, it looks like you might have yourself unmuted. So I just wanted to check with you to see if you wanted to jump in on the conversation too.
Well, I guess how bold of me.
Yeah, thank you.
I got elected in my group, probably because I asked questions. But the one what I'll comment on is the story aspect. And we talked, what I mentioned to Steve is that oftentimes I've been in presentations where a person shows a lot of graphs and I'll glaze over and notice others glazing over. And we really looked, for someone like me, is more on the other end of the spectrum and looks for what is the story behind it. And I loved it that Steve brought that up. And our conversation was about having that balance and not just being, way out there warm and fuzzy or, just hardline numbers, but how do we get those folks together and have them understand each other and learn the benefit of each other's perspective.
Oh, my favorite Tom Peters quote is, hard is soft and soft is hard.
Like that.
Well, that's saying that soft, the touchy-feely, the people stuff is hard to do, and the so-called hard numbers can be very soft sometimes. But I'll encourage you to go to Tom Peters' website or Google Tom Peters hard is soft, soft is hard. Tom Peters has a lot of free stuff.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So Patricia, thank you very much for jumping in on that one. And welcome. Steve, thank you for the commentary, and thank you for the softest hardest soft thing. It hurt my head for a minute.
Oh, Tanya just made a good chat. Read that to everybody.
Let's see.
It's About
Soft
two.
technically, I've renamed critical people skills. Bah. Yeah, that's a great thing. That is a great thing. So let's hear from one or two more folks from breakout groups and just give us a little bit of your insights, key insight, anything that you really talked about that piqued your interest.
So our group had talked about lagging versus leading indicators.
Mm-hmm.
I had given the proviso that we might hear differently from Todd Conklin, but put that aside. And that there is so much context that we're not taking advantage of in our measurements.
May I ask what you think Todd would say differently?
Oh, he will say that there is no such thing as a leading indicator.
That's true. I mean, there is, that is true. I can't measure the future. I will admit I've been in discussions where people say, I want to develop some leading indicators. Somebody throw out, survey results. Well, they occurred in the past. They occurred in the past. So you are correct, Tanya, and so is Todd, that there is no such thing as a leading indicator. That's in the future. So there is a context to that statement. I like that.
Yeah, so I'd have a question on that one. And Tanya, thank you very much for jumping in. Oh, I'm sorry. I think Michael Donovan, you've got yourself unmuted. Do you want to jump in on this conversation?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Tate. Leading indicator activity then would be something you'd want to measure, like a pre-job briefing that they're being done. Wouldn't that be? Because that's an activity that can influence the future work. Make sure you're seeking flawless execution. So just adding that to the conversation.
Yes. And in fact, at the laboratories I deal with, they do actually, they're very concerned about pre-jobs. And what we also have is like an observation checklist. Of course, there's dangers to checklist mentality, but you need to not only go, I had a pre-job, everybody's there, I read the pre-job, but, what's the story? What's the quality? Did people do that? You're the electrician. What are you going to do? So yes, but like a pre-job briefing is a great thing to observe, but you got to come away with something.
Agreed, totally. Thank you for that.
And thanks for jumping in, Michael. And Jake, you are unmuted, so I'm guessing you want to weigh in on this too.
I did. I don't know if there's anything to add necessarily at this point. I agree with the idea that I don't like the name leading and lagging indicators because they're a bit deceptive. The way I kind of try to describe them as a lagging indicator is something you cannot change directly, like the number of injuries or something like that. You can fret over it all you want to, but yes, it happens. It's already done, and you can't change it. The leading indicators are the things that you can relatively easily change, like the number of after-action reviews, things like that. And because you have more control over those, you want to put more effort into those rather than just worrying about the ones that you can't change. That's all. But I think we need different names rather than leading and lagging. That's all.
Yes, I'll make the point that yes, this comes from economics. The economic leading indicators, the economic lagging indicators, but it's in the lexicon. It's words people use, and words are important. So I think it gives meaning. But maybe I should say my theory on there's three kinds of leading indicators. There's the correlation indicators. Like there used to be a story that said the height of women's hemlines was correlated to the stock market. And that's not just from a sexist perspective, but perhaps confidence in the market and things like that. So there are these correlations that make no sense whatsoever, but all we know is they work. Then there are, as you said, Jake, the actions that I take to change the system, which are probably the most important. And then the others are kind of the behavior-based and the things, but probably are weaker too. So when people ask about leading indicators, we usually get to, well, what do you do to change things? So very good, Jake.
Yeah.
Thanks for weighing in.
I think Jake wanted to say something more.
Can I throw one last comment in? You sparked my thinking. I've actually been thinking now in terms of three types of indicators. Inputs, process, and outputs. Inputs
Yes.
are things like, how many hours do I teach? What percentage of people have taken my class? Those are the things that I can control directly, but that by themselves don't mean really anything. The results are the things that you can't control directly, but that mean everything. How are we doing on safety, performance, profitability? And the things in the middle, what we're sort of calling the leading indicators, are the things that you sort of control and sort of mean something, and they're the bridge. But if you have all three, you ought to be able to make as much of a case for causation as you could. That's
beautiful. All. And I do have a drawing I developed with Phil Monroe that has a fourth stage to that.
What?
So right now, here's a number. There are 54 people that are listed as participants right now. So I have a number. 54 people listen to me say this. Now I have a theory that you will go to your workplace and you will adjust the outcomes. So I have a theory that bridges me from the output of 54 people listen to me go blah, 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 and they're actually going to do something. Some proportion of you are going to do something. So I have a theory that bridges over to the outcome, which is profitability, safety, all those things. How's that?
Makes sense.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Steve. And
this is the sort of give and take that really works in these things. This is people building on each other's ideas.
Yeah.
Let's get some more.
And Mike Blevins, you have yourself unmuted. So Mike, you want to jump in on this?
I do. I just want to say that I agree with Stephen and with Todd. We treat leading indicator like a paradox when I think it's actually an oxymoron. What leaders really are interested in are more cause and effect. So let me put a placeholder in there for this organization. When they ask for leading indicators, what they really want to know is, if I do this, will this happen? And I think there's a lot of expertise within this group, HPRCT in general, that can help answer that question. And I think it would be helpful if we talked about that way a little bit more than just simply saying, here's a leading indicator. I mean, the sun's come up, for millennia every day, pretty good indicator, but I still can't say that it's going to come up tomorrow. So
you brought up to me, which is more of that IBM Watson story, is what the people who brought in IBM Watson wanted was, from my leading indicators, should I, am I predicted for my injury rates to go up, and should I take an action? They weren't using the leading indicators as the action, which I think is also a problem. But as I say, I want to demystify leading indicators. If I go to a worker and say, what allows you to work safe? Do you feel safe? What do I learn from them that I can then go, oh, well, what can we monitor and therefore measure from that? How's that sounding? Uh-oh.
Oh, we might have lost Mike.
Oh, but as I say, the leading thing is a very interesting model that gets very much abused. The predictive versus the what am I doing to make, again, financial people want to go, my budget is this, I predict I'm going to spend that, and they're very, okay, I got to match that prediction. And, Dr. Russ Akoff, look him up sometime, great guy, taught at University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Business, is the job is not predicting the future, it's knowing when I need to change the future.
And I'm going to agree with that. Predicting human performance is a risky business.
Mm-hmm.
Great, Mike, thanks for bringing that up. And Rob Fisher, you're unmuted. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think everything you guys are talking about has been great. One of the things that I don't think we educate leaders in well enough is the difference between causation, correlation, contribution, and how those work together, because those feed what people want to see. We always hear people talk about cause and effect relationships, but the real meat lies in the things that are correlated, or the things that contribute, or the things that were non-contributory outcomes. So I think a lot of the leadership training, when you start shifting to more advanced human performance, goes away from just leading. A leading indicator says if this exists, this will be the cause of these other things, to how does all this correlate? What are some things that I can look at as contributors to the potential outcomes, because we're getting so much better at some of the things we've measured in the past, that the one-offs, the bad outcomes that we didn't see coming, could probably be seen better if we looked at corollaries and contributions instead of just causation.
If I may, a key thing there is deterministic versus probabilistic. Now, my undergraduate was in civil engineering, and that was, except for one course, which was in probability engineering, was deterministic. I build the bridge to hold twice the load that I expect it to carry, and I see Jake nodding. So engineers are deterministic. You turn the, management wants this. You turn the dial, the beatings will continue until morale improves. I turn the dial and this should happen. Now, my master's degree in operations research was throw all that deterministic stuff out. The world is probabilistic. God does roll dice. And that is what managers don't get. They hate to be told that you can't control sometimes whether or not you have an automobile accident on your drive home. That just blows managers' minds. It's like if somebody runs that red light against you, it's out of your control. There's a probability that as you cross an intersection going home, a person will drive through the red light the other side. So there is deterministic thinking and probabilistic thinking. Now, does that blow people away? Though I want to know who said, where did that go? Who put Kolmogorov Smirnov? Okay, you should be leading this discussion. Who said that?
See if we get anybody that wants to raise a hand and offer that insight. Elliot.
Yeah, I'll own that one.
Way to go.
Yay!
You have me thinking about different statistical tests to determine the validity of the data. And I guess one test I use, because they can be rare events, right? From quarter to quarter or year to year. And, if we're dealing with some type of a Poisson distribution, because these are very discrete events, whether it happens or not. And, typically the standard deviation for something like that is just the square root of the average. So if you had 9 events one year, then your standard deviation is 3. And plus or minus 2 standard deviations gives you, 95% confidence interval. So if your data is between 3 and 15, statistically, it's really the same. And we like to have control and make changes, but a lot of times from year to year, it can be noise.
Okay, Bob, we have another T speaker for a future conference. I like who chose the word messy, because messy, the mess, and Dr. Akoff would talk about, we have messes, not problems. So who said messy?
I might have been using that to describe context.
Context, okay. But yes, we are taught problem solving. We're taught how to take apart a stopwatch as a child, how do I disintegrate something, but I'm never taught how to put it together. Dr. Russ Akoff had a great saying. You write, your hand does not write. If you doubt that your hand does not write, chop your hand off and put it on the table and see what it will do.
Very nice.
Bad graphical image, but boy, I really love this. People are coming up with some really great things. Now, Dean, did you want to move on to something else, or do we need to continue on with this?
No, let's do this. We'll do just another short breakout.
Okay.
I'm going to put everybody back into, ideally, you'll go back into your exact same groups. And I just want you to spend a little bit of time talking about what specific actions can you take in your respective organizations to move some of these concepts forward. Recognizing you might be different industries, but I think you can still share some insights and some best practices. I'll put you into your breakout groups, and I'll just give you one more broadcast instruction when you're in there. So I'll see you back here in about nine minutes.
Okay, back on the hot seat.
Back on the hot seat. So, way to go, Steve. Everybody, as you're coming back, you may have heard this already. Sorry if I'm being redundant, but if you please go to pollev.com and just answer the question about what's the key action or key actions you're going to take to put some of these concepts into place. It might be just a word, it might be a very short phrase, but if you could do that, and then we'll look for some themes or some good little nuggets of information. And Steve, they might be even gaps. There might be things that you don't see up there that we want to quickly bring up.
True. Hire Steve. No. No, that's not the message.
Okay, so Bob Nelms, when you start getting some results that you want to pop up, that would be awesome. We'd appreciate it. And look at that. Thank you, Bob. So we're seeing some themes around culture, around alignment, around tools and technology. Interesting.
Now notice the comparison between process clarity, which is a very logic side thing, and organization culture, which is a very soft side of thing. Notice those. Now alignment's kind of catching up here, but I thought that was interesting, kind of a hard side and a soft side dichotomy.
Interesting, the tool. So to me, and you know this world better than I do, the tools and technology is one of the lower responses.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I just taught you guys 1930s statistical thing. There, 2 + 2 is still 4. As we got the statistics lecture, the standard deviation of Poisson distribution is still the standard deviation of the average. This stuff has been around forever. Now we got Excel spreadsheet where we can do it on steroids instead of a slide rule. Calculator used to be a job title. But the knowledge has been there for 100 years on how to do this. In fact, I hope people know the student T distribution came from Guinness Brewing.
Yeah, nice.
So, I mean, this is all built on a very long history. There's, So,
okay.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for hands to go up with any insights or observations or anything else you want to share about this, Steve, I'll turn first to you. So organizational culture, front runner, and that kind of.
Well, I will make a point, a metrics point. Let's see, there are 24, 32, 36 responses. There are 14 people out there not complying. What percentage is that? 28%.
Something like that.
Anywho, so what are we seeing? Yes, culture and the culture is an interesting thing. I did post, Dr. Deming is always accused of being the source of the quote of if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And he actually responded during his lifetime with, nothing could be further from the truth. So we're even seeing this here. I mean, how do I actually measure organization culture? A lot of times I'm in a class where I'm face-to-face with people and I'll make the statement, okay, Dean, I love my wife more than you love your significant other. I'm going to assume you're married. Now, prove or disprove that statement with numbers.
Right. Can't do it.
Right. And it's a silly question. But what's important, I hope for everybody, it's their significant others, their spouses, their families is very important in your life. But, do you have a report card on the refrigerator about who's the best son, who's, Dr. Deming even, or no, it was Russ Akoff said, who would want to be married to a loser?
Yeah, right.
So culture is this thing that is where is my context of all this measurement? And yes, a sidestep is the alignment across the organization, which one of the problems with our metrics is they tend to be very stovepiped. I only want a goal that I can personally control. But a lot of the writers, Akoff and Deming, are like, but it's not the boxes, it's the lines between the boxes. You just can't go financial department output plus operation department output plus this department output is the sum total. There's negative interaction. So there's always a lament. Why is the whole not the sum of the parts? And it's the negative interactions between the boxes. So I think that is what's being captured in this phrase alignment across the organization. And yes, there is the technical, which We can argue about process clarity and execution. Though if I were to take my camera around my train room, I will show you all sorts of operator aids, all sorts of this is where you deliver this car to. You know, I've had to be so that we operate this thing as a real railroad and have fun, which is fun. I have to tell people the story of the railroad, and they have to have clarity of what is the railroad trying to accomplish. You know, where do the cars get delivered to? Where do they get sorted? How do you know whether you can go with your train or not? So yes, without the process clarity, that bedrock, we are kind of on a random path.
Yeah. So
okay.
Thank you. And Galaxy S8, your hand keeps popping up.
Galaxy Quest.
Whoever is in there is Galaxy S8. There you go.
Hi there. I just thought I'd share my thoughts on it. I put a vote towards the process clarity and execution, and that's, Steve, you had made a point there about doing some of the heavy lifting, and it's funny, as you said that, I had an image in my mind of like a power lifter, someone lifting a lot of weight, and I think about a good process and the execution of that as it being the structure and lifting organizational culture. And that's something I'm thinking about a lot lately, is feedback mechanisms and how do we channel this information so we collect it accurately and it's timely and it's not a burden for those that are inputting it, and then we turn that back into insights for the organization.
Yes. Very insightful.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, and let's see if we have any other questions or comments on discussions in the breakout groups. And I'm not seeing any. So
I'll share mine.
There you go.
Thank you, Brandy.
Because I was in the session with Steve, which is really great discussion, having him in there as well. And I kind of asked him, because I'm new to my current organization. I've only been there since March. And he gave me a really accurate answer to my question about how I can be more, what I can do and be more aware of this. And he basically said, go interact with those data analysts and find out what data you're sitting on. Because I think that was a good takeaway for me personally is, there probably is a lot of data that we're sitting on that we're not even aware of. How do I become more aware of that? Well, I need to get to know the people who are analyzing all that. What's out there that we don't know?
Yeah, that's an interesting, so thank you for sharing that. Speaking that same language, data experts and business experts, if you will, and having that common framework, I think is critical. And it takes a little bit of effort up front, doesn't it?
Language is a piece of this.
Yeah, Brandy, thanks for jumping in there. Mike Blevins, you are unmuted. What do you want to share?
Well, I want to build on that thought and connect to a breakout as well. I commented at some point during one of the breakouts that HPRCT struggled for the last several years to get trending participation. And this newer person at HPRCT questioned why. And it caused me to think about it. And in the conversations today, one of the things that I've heard, everybody with an Excel spreadsheet is all of a sudden a statistical expert, so they don't need trending anymore, is one myth that we need to break down. And somebody else said data analytics as well, and you just mentioned that. And one of the thoughts I've got for future HPRCT discussions and this audience that is interested in trending is perhaps talking about the stories that created the data, and look at data as though something caused that to be that way. It's not just a number. I mean, like this chart that you're looking at right now, there's 30-something stories there as to what's behind that. And Stephen has done a really nice job today of sort of connecting the stories with the numbers. And I think that's very helpful. So again, just another placeholder for future HPRCT conversations.
True. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I kind of, my mentor and I lament in the Deming world. And by the way, let me put a pitch out for Dr. Ed Baker just wrote a book called Symphony of Profound Knowledge. Now, everybody talks about Dr. Deming's 14 points, but they never talk about his system of profound knowledge. And again, this is an update called Symphony of Profound Knowledge, because Dr. Deming always uses the model, the symphony, as, they're not competing with each other, who can play the loudest, who can play the best solo, versus, say, a bowling team. Now, most of our businesses are more like a symphony orchestra than a bowling team, for example. So this idea of symphony of profound knowledge, there's a lot of stuff in there. So I think almost we need to reinvent and rediscover from Deming and Russ Akoff and Dr. Schuhart, what are the interactions between the pieces that we talk about? Steve gets up and talks about trending. Charles gets up and talks about this. Todd will get up and talk about that. How do we put this together into a system that manages the interactions between the boxes? By another way, this is called rock logic, which is treating things as discrete elements, versus water logic. That comes from Dr. Edward de Bono. 7 Thinking Hats, that's another resource. But nobody recently has knitted together the abilities that we have with data analytics with what does that mean from a cultural perspective? What does it mean from a human perspective? We tend to put the, I got teased a bit as a kid as a number wonk, let's put it that way. And money, as I say, I've always heard, oh, Steve, you understand that stuff. And obviously whoever just waxed eloquent about Poisson distributions understands it, but that seems to put a barrier between us and the rest of the world. How do we break that barrier? Dean?
If I had that answer, I did.
Well, I've been trying, if you haven't noticed, I've been trying to chip away with my chisel all afternoon here.
So thank you all for that conversation. Yeah. And I'm going to just quickly segue. Steve, I'm going to go back to you, but I want like a 20-second wrap up, if you could.
Okay. 20-second wrap up. Hopefully I demonstrated there's value in the data and you've got data. You've probably got a company statistician. Nike, just do it. Go find your data, go find your statistician and start using the data. The rest will follow.
Awesome. Thank you. And so here's what we're going to do in closing. First off, I want to sincerely thank everybody for the time, the discussion, energy you put into today. Charles, Steve, thank you for sharing the insights and knowledge that you did, and everybody, the collaboration that you did in the breakout groups. We are going to wrap up for the day. What I would love if you would do, all of you, before you leave the session, just consider this final 3 minutes or whatever it takes you to do as a plus minus conversation in the chat box. Before you leave, just give us things that really worked for you, or alternatively, things that you think we could have improved from today, because we're doing this for 2 more days and we want to learn from this experience and make the second 2 days even better. So thank you all for your time and for your attention. And if you could just give us those plus minus nuggets in the chat box before you leave, I'd appreciate it. And have a great afternoon, evening.